Right, good morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to you all to our now regular webinar on our commercial performance barometer. Um, we are really genuinely excited, not just webinar excited, but genuinely excited to share the results of January to April, this major new initiatives of the sector, a powerful combination of survey and dashboard that we know is fast becoming a key resource for our members. And this is more than just data. We are combining data with case studies, quotes from members, and turning it into a game-changing member benefit. So the only place where you can find audience figures, commercial performance, and visitor sentiment all in one place. And this has very much come from you. Our members have told us they wanted clearer, more connected insights. And so this is us delivering for you. So we've got a combination of data and case studies to share with you today. We'll go through a bit about how the dashboard works, and if you're not taking part, how you can take part. We'll talk about that at the end. But also a massive thank you for those of you on the call who are participating, who are sending in your survey results monthly. It's only a success because you are taking part. The more people we can get to join and be as representative of the cultural sector as possible across the country, the more powerful this dashboard will be. So a big thank you. I'm really pleased. I'm sure John will mention this in a bit, but April has seen over 140 sites respond so far, which is fantastic. And we're growing every month. So the value of this barometer will come from that breadth of voices, that diverse representative of types of organisations across the UK. And I'm pleased to say we've got a real mix of multi-site and single-site venues in there as well. So I'm not going to talk much more. I'm going to hand over to the chaps from Decision House. I'm really pleased to be joined by Steve Mills, who is Director of Decision House, and John Young, who is Travel, Culture and Tourism Director, who've been leading on this research. They'll take us through the latest insights, as I say, from January to April, which is hot off the press this morning. And again, there'll be a chance for Q&As at the end. Feel free to pop questions in the chat as we go throughout the conversation, and we'll try and pull them out by the end of the call. The session is being recorded, so we can share it with you afterwards, and particularly with those people who haven't been able to join the call this morning, and we will make the slides available as well. So I think it's everything you need from me. John, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. I'm going to just share my screen. Okay. Super. You can all see that.
Looks good, John.
Excellent. Great. So yeah, thank you very much, Tom. So I think that's a really helpful introduction into what we're doing. So I'll just jump straight into the presentation. So yeah, today's presentation probably take about 35 minutes, and I'll be covering the following areas. So I'm just going to start off by introducing you to the Performance Barometer. Looking at the list of people attending, I think a number of you will know all about it and you contribute, but there are some who may well be new to it. So I will give you that very quick bit of background. Then we'll sort of go into the wider sort of industry context, I guess. So what are the broader factors that are driving behavior that may have an impact on the figures that we'll see a little bit later. Then we'll look at the cultural sector's commercial performance so far this year. So we'll look at admissions primarily, and then also average transaction values and spend per visitor for catering and retail. Then we've got a section where I will draw on some best practice. So as part of the survey, we ask organizations to tell us what is driving their performance, or is there anything interesting that they feel that other organizations would benefit from? And we've got a number of lovely examples in there. So if numbers aren't your thing, then do hang on in there and to that fourth chapter, because there's lots of really nice examples there. Then we've got a very small chapter on the special questions we ask. So each month we ask one individual question, where it could be the price of a certain item in the shop, or anything else of interest, and we'll quickly cover that. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end. Okay, so first of all, introducing the barometer. So Tom's already done that to some extent, but I think I will touch on it. I think one of the key things to understand, is why we're running this barometer. And there are two broad reasons. The first is to inform members of cultural enterprises and the broader sector of the sector's commercial performance. So I've worked in the sector for, I think, 16 years now, and it's always been a frustration of mine that it's quite hard to get hold of data that illustrates how well the sector is doing. I guess up to date anyway. There's lots that tells us how well the sector did last year, but very little from a month-to-month basis, particularly across different types of organizations. And we also really want to sort of inspire members with examples of best commercial practice. And that's particularly important in the current climate where there are so many challenges. And if we can point to examples of organizations that have done really well, then hopefully we are helping the sector overall. Um, and as I alluded to in the inform objective, we want to do this with speed and simplicity. So we are committed to turning around results within a month of the previous month, and we're hoping to get even quicker as time progresses. Um, just in terms of what the barometer involves, if there's anybody on the call who hasn't taken part yet. So this is a short survey that we run once a month, the first week of every month. And it's conducted in two different formats. So if you are a multi-site organization, then you will receive an Excel questionnaire where you can input results from all of your sites. Or if you're a single site organization, then you'll receive an online survey. It's exactly the same questionnaire, but with different formats to suit the type of organization. And in terms of what the questionnaire covers, so we ask a number of questions around your profile, so where you're based, your site type, charging structure, how many people you typically welcome each year. Those questions you're only asked once. And then beyond that, we ask questions around admissions, catering, retail, how you feel as an organization, and also then some of those special questions, which we'll touch on later. And finally, in this sort of introductory section, we provide a number of different types of reporting. So there's two dashboards that we offer. So there's a dashboard where you can look at all the data and you can filter in lots of different ways. And I will quickly show you at the end of this presentation what that looks like. And we also have another dashboard where we take your open text comments on the drivers of commercial performance. And we categorize those into themes and into different themes. And you can read all of those different quotes in your own time. So a number of different ways that you can sort of play with the data. At the end of each month, we also provide an email summary that's sort of outlining the key trends we're about to sort of send out this month's. And obviously, we run webinars as well. So we're planning to run these at the key points in the year. So this is a post-Easter webinar. We're also hoping to do a post-summer. And again, trying to do that with speed and simplicity too. And finally, I guess in terms of where we are so far this year, so we've just completed our fourth month, so we've got 4 months worth of data. We've had over 200 sites take part. I think it's around 220. That varies month to month. This month we had around 148. And we've got representation across the UK, so organisations within each of the 4 nations. And beyond as well. So we have some representation in the Republic of Ireland and a couple in mainland Europe too. So our ambition is to have over 1,000 sites across the world, even more maybe. But for now, we've got some really robust figures that we can work with. Okay, so just to start off with, to set the scene, around the context that we are operating in. So none of this will be a surprise to you, but it is useful to provide a reminder, I think. The first one is around the cost of living crisis and the challenges that we face as a result of this. So I've seen various reports in the last few weeks that people are becoming more confident, perhaps optimism with better weather, falling interest rates, etc., etc. But really, I think the data suggests that we are still in the heart of the cost of living crisis, and this will be driving decision making. So this chart here is taken from the ONS website, and I do really tend to trust what they produce. And it shows the proportion of adults reporting a cost of living increases in the last month. So the dark blue line that is increased in the last few months shows the proportion that say that their cost of living has increased. So as you can see, according to this metric, we're not really seeing a much more positive consumer. Um, Below that, there's a box which shows the GfK Consumer Index, which is also quite a trusted source, is showing some positive signs. So there's one metric they use, the Major Purchasing Index, that has improved, which may be a sign of people feeling a bit more confident. But generally, I think there will be these continued concerns around finances, and that will be driving a lot of what we see today. Um, Another really important point, I think, is weather extremes. So again, we're all living through this. So you probably don't need me to sort of to tell you, but it's really important context for the data we're about to see. So far this year, we're only 4 months in. We've had the strongest UK storm for 10 years in January, particularly affecting Scotland, north of England, and parts of Wales, which led to lots of closures. Maintenance issues, leaks in the roof, and so forth. So that had a really negative impact at the start of the year. We had a relatively settled February. March got a bit warmer, but April was particularly warm. So I think the third warmest April on record, and the records go back to 1945, I believe. Um, and yeah, that's obviously will have an impact too. For some, it's a real positive, but for others who have an indoor offer, perhaps less so. And we'll see some data as we progress that really confirms that. Okay, so now jumping on to the commercial performance so far this year. So to start off with, I'm just going to share some figures on how you as venues feel about your commercial performance. So this is often a really useful metric because there are so many factors that go into commercial performance. It's not just about people through the doors or how much they're spending. Perhaps there are other sort of streams of your commercial offer that we don't report on. Also, there's your rising cost, etc., etc. So this chart here provides 5 options. So it's excellent, good, just okay, poor, or terrible. And I define just okay, poor, and terrible as negatives. A little bit of debate there. It's down to interpretation. Maybe some of you saying just okay are in the positive or neutral. Um, but I think the key story here is that it's not until April this year that we've seen a majority give a positive response. So um, in April just gone, just over half, so 53% said that they had a good or excellent month. So this really sort of is the story of the year so far. A relatively negative few months followed up by a positive April. Um, What does this look like in terms of admissions? So if you attended the last webinar, then we spoke of a slow start of the year. So we had the sector 4% down on average in January. And provisionally, we shared the same for February, and that was confirmed as we got all the survey completes in. And March was 10% down on average. Now, there were caveats for each of these 3 months. So January, as I mentioned earlier, saw some of the worst, the worst storm in 10 years. February actually had a condensed half term for some parts of the country, so that was also driving the fall, certainly in some areas. And March last year was included Easter, so we kind of expected that drop. But what we did positively see was a rise in admissions for April this year. Again, there's a caveat. Easter was in April this year, but in March last year. But what we can do is look at what that performance looks like across the year. So um, we've got 2 additional columns here. The first one looks at the combined March to April performance. And the reason we've done it this way is to try and understand I guess the net impacts of Easter in March and April in either year, and we've seen a very slight increase overall. And when we look at January to April, there's also a slight increase there. A little bit of an explainer on how we come to these figures. So to get to these, we can only look at organizations that have participated in each of these months. So it's not a straight average because that would show a negative. So there is a big caveat certainly around the January to April figures. So for that, we only have 38 sites. But certainly for March to April, where we've got 86 sites that participated in both months, I think we can be fairly confident that it's a good reflection of what we're seeing. Um, so really what we're seeing here is that April has really turned the year around. We're obviously only 4 months in, but that's later Easter, that good weather, has really driven some positive admissions. And as we stand, the sector is marginally up. So given the climate that we just shared, financial and meteorological, then I guess that is broadly a positive. Um, And I guess one more explainer on this, if you are wondering how can we have 3 negative months and 1 positive month and then overall be positive, and that'll be because as the year progresses, more people will visit sites generally. So you will have a lot more visitors in April than you will in January. So a +10 counts for a lot more than even a -10 would at the start of the year. Um, just to sort of really hammer home that point around a positive April compared to March last year and April last year, we asked the direct question in this month's survey: Was your Easter 2025? How was your Easter 2025 compared to your Easter 2024? And more of you said better than worse. So 39% saying better and 28% worse. So broadly speaking, across the sector, this is clearly shows that we've had a good month in April. Um, Obviously, these are just averages and they don't tell the whole story. For every positive or negative average that I've shared, there will be some of you on the call today who will be saying, actually, that's not our experience at all. So I've shown this chart, which shows the breakdown of admissions changes against the equivalent month in the previous year. So what you can clearly see here is that whilst the majority in each month reflect that average, for example, the majority in January saying they were 3% down or more, there is a sort of quite a large minority in each month that goes against that. So, for example, in January and February, actually around a third reported an increase in admissions. Even in March, when there wasn't that Easter, there wasn't an Easter as there was last year, around a quarter reported strong admissions. Equally, in April, 1 in 5 said their admissions were actually down on last year, and 14% saying about the same. So there's clearly a very nuanced story to tell. And if you don't fit with the averages, then I guess the point is you're not alone. And I guess one really sort of final point on this chart is that we can tell positive stories in each month so far this year, and that's where we really sort of try to draw out some of the value from this survey. Certainly, when we look at the best practice a little later, that there are success stories in each month, and hopefully this can benefit all of you on the call. Um, so when we publish this data, if you have accessed our dashboard, you will be aware that there are lots and lots of different ways that you can filter and cut the data. You can look by region, you can look by type of attraction, whether you're indoor, outdoor, city, rural, etc., etc. We've done all that for you. And on this chart, pulled out the key differentiator so far this year, and that is whether a venue is indoor or outdoor. So we've looked across regions and all the other areas, but it's whether you're indoor or outdoor that really drives the differences. And probably not a huge surprise, having just talked about the weather and some of the extremes that we've seen. So if we look back in January, we had indoor venues pretty neutral. But outdoor and mixed indoor-outdoor venues, 11% down on the year before. So clearly that Storm Owen had a huge impact back in January. Um, didn't have the big lift for indoor, and I guess, if it was so bad that you wouldn't leave the house, then it doesn't matter if you're indoor or outdoor. Um, Moving on to April, then we've seen a converse impact. So indoor sites only having a very marginal lift. And if you consider that um, Easter was in April this year and March last year, that 1% rise, I guess, is a net drop because we saw an 8% drop in March. So if you are an indoor venue, you may have looked at the positive figures I showed earlier in this presentation. You may have been thinking, well, that's not our story at all. Well, you're certainly not alone there because we're seeing that across indoor sites. But conversely, outdoor sites in April doing incredibly well. So plus 14% on last year. So a combination of time off and good weather really driving people to those outdoor or sort of mixed indoor outdoor sites. Um, and when we look at some individual sectors, excuse me, we see an almost mirror image when we look at museums, galleries, and libraries. Obviously, the vast majority of those being indoor versus heritage sites, parks, and gardens. The vast majority of those either being outdoor or a mix of indoor and outdoor. So clearly, the type of organization you are and the type of offer in terms of indoor or outdoor is really driving performance so far. And I think there is a broader point here. It may feel quite obvious and intuitive given what we know about the weather, but in a time when there is such extreme weather, I guess it really highlights the importance of having that outdoor offer, even if it's only a part of what you offer. And if that there is that potential there, then I guess it is something to explore. And we have some examples of best practice that demonstrate this in action in the next section. Another discriminator, which I really did expect to see having a bit more of an impact, was whether you are a free or paid venue. So we did see this in January, that paid venues were doing significantly worse than free venues. And this was the case if we separated indoor and outdoor as well. So it did feel like that was individually driving performance. And perhaps that was driven by the post-Christmas saving start of the year, maybe people feeling a little bit gloomy and cutting back. But we haven't really seen that in the months that follow. But I guess an important bookmark on that is that we do appear to be seeing it in spending on site. So when we look at retail in a few slides' time, we have seen that spending is a little bit lower there. So it could be that people are still visiting, but not spending as much on non-essential items when they are at the venue. Um, Okay. So now a couple of slides on catering and performance there. So I guess an important bit of context here. These are some of the less answered questions. A number of participating sites don't have a catering offer, or I imagine have a third party running the catering, so don't have access to this data. Maybe it's less important to you. But I think there are some positive signs from catering from the figures we have received. So ATV, so that's average transaction value, has been up for each of the months so far in 2025. Only March below inflation. So we've got inflation to April as plus 3.5%. So we saw strong increases across those 3 out of the 4 months. And also importantly, there have been strong increases in spend per visitor as well. So these are the average changes, as with all our figures, but generally a positive story. And I think it's really important that the spend per visitor increases as well as average transaction value, because if it's just average transaction value, then that means fewer people are spending, even if they are spending more when they're there. So does show that the catering offer at your sites is, I guess, resilient and really supporting the sector. Then when we look at this in terms of revenue, so this is a very simple calculation where we multiply spend per visitor by the number of visitors. We saw plus 3% in January. February and March, pretty neutral, and that's because of the drops in visitors. But April, we saw a really strong increase. And I think it's fair to say that overall catering revenue would be up on the year based on that really strong April. And finally, some further catering stats. So we have an average transaction value January to April of £8.10, average spend per visitor of £1.80, and a new figure that we've pulled out based on popular demand from the last webinar is the conversion rates, and this is a proxy. So what we do here is we divide the number of transactions by the number of visitors. One of the members told us that's how they do it. The best way of doing it would be to speak to visitors, but obviously we don't have that data available. So that's a 25%. So if you do want to understand where you are at compared to this figure, then just divide transactions by the number of visitors. Um, Now looking at retail, so retail's performing a little less well. So we have seen slight increases in average transaction value versus 2024, but 3 out of the 4 months below inflation. And spend per visitor after a strong January, actually, this has tailed off a little bit in February, March, and April. I guess there's lots of different reasons why this could be. So perhaps in April, when we have more family visitors, then fewer of the group will be spending. So there is that caveat there. But generally, I think what this sort of suggests is, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that we may be seeing as many people or more people come through the doors, but they may not necessarily be spending on site. So perhaps, or just spending, paying for admission. So a number of you actually asked the question in the survey. You know, are we seeing this across the sector? And it does suggest that this is happening to some extent. And then when it comes to retail revenue, so drops in each of the first 3 months of the year, and a rise in April driven by that big spike in admissions. But I think overall we'd likely see a below inflation increase in revenue. So those of you who are finding retail quite challenging at the moment, it does feel like the figures bear that out. In terms of some other retail stats, so average transaction value, £9.90, average spend per visitor, £1.40, and the average conversion at 16%. And that 16% actually stayed pretty much constant for each of the 4 months. It hardly moved at all. I think it went up to 17% in one of the months. Um, Finally in this section, a little bit of analysis on what is driving performance. So those of you who take part in the survey will be familiar with a question that asks exactly that. So this is based on your perspective. I guess some of it will be hypothesizing, some of it, with confidence. We see three constants that come through in most months, some more than others. I should add that we do have an interactive tool, which I will very quickly share later, where you can really go into detail in these and look at these responses in terms of categories and topics and individual quotes. But for now, I'm just going to share the three headline areas. So clearly, weather has had a huge impact in January and April. Slightly less so in February and March, but still fairly important. In both those months, we had more negative than positive quotes about the impact of weather. Now, I think for April, it may be that people were just a little bit more emotional about it if they had a negative experience with the weather. But still, it really highlights that even with sunny weather, that can be a real negative for some types of sites, as I'm sure you're all aware. Cost of living also coming across quite consistently. I think this will be this is hypothesizing without visitor data, but I guess many of you will have seen what I've just shown in the previous chart in terms of retail spend being a little bit sluggish. So clearly that is a factor. And the third one is around programming, and this is broadly speaking a positive thing. So around 1 in 5 in each of the months highlighting programming as being a positive for admissions and secondary spend. Sometimes it's a negative, but even then, I guess it's a net positive because they may be reflecting on the previous year and the great programming they had then that drove secondary spend. So a number of different factors. I think some of these, that we can respond to and react to, and we've got some really nice case studies in the next section that highlights how that's been done. Some other leading mentions, some of you may be shouting at the screen or maybe not, but a number of you have felt quite sort of passionate about some of these other areas. Obviously, school holiday timings have had a real impact on some. I think some mentioned that having Easter a little bit later means there's more competition, more experiences open from April onwards. So it's not just the weather, it's actually what people can do that's driving them elsewhere. Lots mentioning refurbishment and opening hours. Like to think that would be consistent year on year across the sector, though. Staffing an issue for a number of you. Admission prices. So we did see at least two or three venues saying they've introduced admission prices for the first time. One or two cathedrals and a number of and some council run venues. And I guess this really speaks to the broader cost of living crisis and squeezed finances in the public sector too. Some mentioned retail improvements and a few mentioning politics already. So references to Trump's tariffs, as they've been referred to, as maybe already having a negative impact on the US visitors. Equally, we have had some mentioning that they're seeing a slow return of Chinese visitors. So hopefully some positives in terms of overseas visitors. Okay, so now jumping on to examples of best practice. I've got one example of not so great practice as well, just to kind of make that point. But broadly, this is a positive section. So this all comes from the two questions where we ask about drivers of commercial performance. And also, is there anything you would like to share with the sector that they would really benefit from? And making their appearance for the second consecutive webinar is the Old Royal Naval College with some really nice examples that kind of speak to a lot of what we've been talking about so far in this presentation. So I'll read out this first quote. We've benefited from good weather throughout April, which has resulted in higher visitor numbers in this period. And I guess that speaks to their indoor and outdoor offer. They also had two large-scale installations between November and March, which has resulted in high visitation through repeat visitors on the annual pass. And I guess what this really touches on is that having that programming at the start of the year in the off-peak season doesn't just bring visitors then, but with their annual pass model, it'll bring people back later on in the year as well. They referenced that they launched an outdoor food and drink market as a driver to encourage visitation to the grounds and support upsell opportunities. They've also launched a new film and TV tour and restarted tours of the Chapel Dome. So loads of different initiatives at the Old Royal Naval College. Tom did a really great interview with, I believe, Kate Miners on the Cultural Enterprises podcast, which was a really great listen, which touches on a lot of this. But this really speaks to, I guess, reacting to circumstances. Certainly, the extreme weather. You have an indoor and outdoor offer, and I guess trying new things out. As well to attract new audiences. I guess it really does help if you feature in that many films and TV shows to be able to run those TV tours too. But I think that's something they've actively pursued as well. Another really interesting example was from the Cartoon Museum. So they have a new exhibition called Cats in Cartoons, which they describe as a much easier sell to people. Those who visited bought lots in the shop and some items unexpectedly sold out. Also an element on the team working incredibly hard to engage that family audience. So I guess what we're seeing here is a really popular exhibition, but also a very commercial exhibition where you can sell lots of merchandise. And this is a really, I think, an important theme that came across across a number of you who responded to the survey. Highlighting the importance of programming that has a real strong commercial potential. And I remember doing some work for a large national a couple of years ago where they sought to understand the impact of exhibitions on commercial spend, and it really did differ from exhibition to exhibition. So clearly there is, some really important conversations to have with the programming team in these challenging times. And the tip from Cartoon Museum was cats sell. So if in doubt, stick a cat on it, and maybe it'll sell. Um, some other lovely examples. So Liverpool Cathedral also in making an appearance for the second consecutive webinar. So they talk about an art installation, which really drove an increase in dwell time and secondary spend compared to 2024. The first time they'd programmed artwork over the Easter holidays. The National Archives have the MI5 exhibition, which was free and opened on the 5th of April, and that has resulted in a massive uplift in visitors and on-site shop income. And looking at their figures, those were huge increases that they shared. So real positive story there. Um, Beyond that, just as I mentioned that there were some sort of negative examples, if we can describe them as that. I haven't put names against these for obvious reasons, but the first quote on the top left refers to the need to advocate internally for commercially viable exhibitions, and how there's a concern that this year's shows are not going to have the same impact as exhibitions last year. Um, Another quote from another organization saying that their temporary exhibition is not popular and less suited to merchandise. And on the right-hand side, I guess we can see the impact of events aimed at new audiences, and how that's not always commercially beneficial. So one organization ran some Lego-themed events, and whilst they may have been successful in attracting different audiences, these visitors were less inclined to make a repeat visit, to purchase a souvenir, or to be converted to members. So really, I guess maybe this isn't a negative overall in the grand scheme of things, but there can be negative commercial consequences. And similar for under 5 days at one site, saying that they see food sales drop. So I guess all of the different points to consider with programming. So just going to whip through a few more bits of best practice. I'm conscious of time. Saw some really lovely examples. So we had Titanic Belfast saying that they opened the retail store in the evening of a large city conference when they were hosting a large city conference dinner. And this was really beneficial as some of those attendees wouldn't have had any time to shop whilst in the city. Roman Baths ran a silent disco and murder mystery night and made some really strong profit. I mean, who wouldn't want to attend that? Who wouldn't want to attend that? Local offers. So we ran a locals go half price offer at SS Great Britain. We had an open submission exhibition, which featured the work of local artists at the Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art. So lots of initiatives to reach out to local audiences as well. The Migration Museum have been rotating their front window displays, and that has really generated interest. Stonehenge introducing a penny press machine and also a new totes bag and guidebook offer, both of which have had a really positive impact in revenue. Um, Fruit Market Gallery introducing a makers program and talking customers through the items in the shop, and they said that's really had a positive impact on profits. And finally, a logistical improvement from the London Museum using the EU-based agent service so they can post online orders to EU customers again. Loads of lovely bits of best practice there. And the final one I wanted to share, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to whip through the end now, is from the Foundling Museum. If you're attending the Museum and Heritage Show last week, you may have seen this presentation, but I won't read all of this out. But what it really demonstrates is that in the last year or so, they have doubled their income from venue hire. And this is something that a few of you have mentioned as a negative so far this year, but really highlights through some really, I guess, impressive interventions what can be done in even in this very difficult climate. Okay, 3 quick slides on special questions. So this is based on individual questions that we ask you around the price of individual items. So last month we shared this, the average price of an Americano, £3.18. Going up to 4.50 in some sites. The average price of a single postcard, 73 pence, higher in London, lower in Scotland. And the average price of a paperback souvenir guidebook, £4.47, and slightly and higher at some of your larger organizations. I guess the key takeout from this is that maybe there's potential to increase the margins on some of your items. And I guess you can look at this in your own time after we've finished this presentation. Looking ahead, we have seen optimism decline amongst the sector over the last 4 months. But importantly, I think people are more optimistic than pessimistic. So maybe we've kind of balanced at a realistic setting, having started off very optimistic this year. And I'm just going to finish off with 4 key reflections from what we've seen. So the first is that not all programming drives commercial spend, but the best programming does. So If in doubt, remember cats sell. But generally, I think there's that point to try and combine the commercial viability of programming um, with other aims. Providing that indoor and outdoor proposition can combat weather extremes, and maybe that climate responsiveness is really important in the current climate. Um, Innovative events and venue hire options can drive revenue even in the current financial climate. And finally, there may be scope to increase the margin on guidebooks and postcards and maybe other things. I'm going to leave it there. I'm conscious we don't have a huge amount of time for questions, but hopefully we can cover a few, and I can certainly stay on a bit later.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. That was absolutely fantastic and really wonderful to see a lot of those kind of case studies there. What I've done, I've popped in the chat the link to the next webinar, which is actually bookable now. It is the 23rd of September. So as John says, we will have a post summer holidays analysis for you there. So that's free to book. And a couple of other information bits and pieces in there. If you want to get in touch with us about who's receiving the survey, the email address is in there. So yes, there is some time for questions if you want them. A quick couple of things from me, and Steve, afterwards I wonder if I come to you for your kind of any thoughts you've taken away from today. John mentioned at the end there our sort of question we add in at the end of every survey. What we'd like to do for the next one, which is due out in the next couple of weeks, if I got my dates right, is on particularly focused on venue hire. So if you have something you would like to know, let us know. We've got some ideas ourselves, but we're keen that it's something that you are particularly interested in knowing. So anything around venue hire or events potentially, we would like to throw into the next survey. So do let me know. A few more things in the chat. I know someone's asked about the presentation on site. We will share the slides and the recording with you all afterwards, and then the dashboard. Is the dashboard live, John, with April fully up to date as of now?
It is live, and we'll be giving a bit of a summary, which will touch on some of this today shortly.
And yes, e-commerce stuff. We would love to include more, but we're really trying to keep this as succinct as possible so people respond. What I will say with anything like e-commerce, we will be doing an annual benchmarking survey in the next few months. So there will be data from other areas that aren't featured in this monthly dashboard.
It might be we could do that as a special question, Tom, if the demand is huge.
Absolutely, completely agree. Some questions coming in. Any sort of audience demographic metrics in regards to attendance? I mean, I know in these surveys we don't particularly ask for that detail at the moment. We do in our annual stuff. Are you, Steve, John, are you seeing anything around that in the sector?
I think it is a tricky one on this survey, just because we're asking venues to tell us what they're seeing, and they may not have the visitor data at that point. There were a few mentions of overseas audiences. Certainly the US audience not being quite as strong as last year, and the Chinese audience slowly coming back, which I think I did mention. So we're seeing a bit of that. I don't know, Steve, were you going to say something? Let's see if I'm
I was just
muted.
going to say that I've seen one or two sites that we do visitor surveys for, where actually does appear to be a bit of a post-Trump effect. So actually, in that January to March final quarter of the financial year period, we have seen US visitors drop off more rapidly than we had in the previous 3 quarters. And also, yeah, to your point, Chinese market rapidly coming back now, to be honest, from what we've seen so far.
Any other key takeaways, Steve? What you've got?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, John alluded to this all the way through, really, is just how the cost of living post-pandemic has really kind of shifted everybody's decision-making mindset and process, to be honest, so that it's now shifting much more towards a situation where instead of saying, let's go to X attraction on a Sunday afternoon just because it's an attraction, to give me that reason to visit. So the whole issue around programming, I think, has been so much more important. And I think that's driven by the cost of living crisis, because what programming does is it gives that element of certainty that people need at the moment, and that level of reassurance that when people go along to an attraction, there is something very specific there that will give them the value that they need at the moment because they are feeling the pinch. So programming is just, yeah, I think incredibly important. I think if we'd have asked these same questions 6 or 7 years ago, we'd have had something completely different, to be honest. And I think it's all driven by that. And I think weather is linked to it as well. So again, people want that certainty. So if they can be guaranteed of decent weather on their afternoon out or whatever it is, then they are much more likely to visit. And I think so that's, again, I think become even more of a factor in the last sort of couple of years. I think that my only other reflection is around catering as well, and I'm not surprised to see catering doing really well. We did some work with Alva, so we also run the Alva public sentiment work as well, and we asked a question back in January about what makes a really good experience where people can say whatever they want. And actually, catering, food and drink offer comes out as one of the really key drivers of what makes a great visit experience. So I'm not surprised to see that doing well at the moment.
Well, I think the Americano question went down very well when we did that in January. I wonder if we do one about pints, because I paid nearly £8 for a Guinness the other day and I'm still recovering. It wasn't at a cultural venue, I might add, but that's the way things are going. John, thank you. You've answered a very important question. Are SPV, ATV, because including in VAT? And yes, they are. So good question there to clarify that. John, do you want to do a quick show of the dashboard itself for those still on the call?
Yes, I would love to.
That'd be great.
Brilliant. So I will quickly share again. And yeah, so as you can see, is that sharing?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Brilliant. So those of you who take part may be very familiar with this, that everybody who or every member of cultural enterprises will have access to this dashboard. I will very quickly go through it. The key elements. So most of it is self-explanatory. There are various filters that you can apply to all of the results, and you will see most of the key figures that I have shown you so far today. And I guess that is the key element to it. What you can do is merge different filters, so maybe you'll find it more useful. You might want to look at various filters together. I've gone for London museums and galleries, for example, and you can do this with as many as you want. One little bit of caution is just to be a little careful how many filters you apply, because as I mentioned earlier, typically there's one or two that are really driving the story. And then so far this year is whether you're indoor or outdoor. There are a number of other elements that you can access here as well. So those open texts that I showed you earlier, you can look at all of these. You can also filter them by the type of organization. So that's all the comments we've had across all the months. We've also got a library where you can look at the methodology, the questionnaires, the special question results, and also some analysis of the verbatims as well. So, and today's report will be in here too. And I think Tom's going to share it as well. And the final thing I wanted to share was our text comments dashboard. So just to give you a very quick overview of this. So we take all of the comments around the drivers of commercial performance and we feed them into some software called Kaplaner. And what this does then is it analyzes each of your comments against different categories, and we help it with that at the start. So we do the coding, but it is AI software and it learns from our suggestions. So as each month goes by, we will just put these quotes in that you provided in, and it will basically do the analysis for us, and we may do a bit of checking here and there. There's 4 charts in here, so we can look at the overall sentiment. We can filter this by all the different areas. So we can look at survey month, for example, which is probably the most useful. And then we've got all these different categories. So I showed you 3 different topics earlier, but we've got lots more. There's about 20 in total. We've got the headline categories and individual topics within that, and they are sort of separated by positive and negative. So let's look at weather. External factors, we've got weather, mostly negative, as I just sort of went through. Yeah, you can go through that in your own time. We've got another couple of nice little charts within here. So we've got one chart here which shows the interrelationship between different factors. Weather, for example, some of the thickness of the the link will sort of show the relationships. So, for example, with weather, you can see that opening hours has an impact on that as well, and you can do this for all of these. And then finally, there's a chart that shows the progress of some of these overall categories over the months, and I've shared some of these with you already. So all of this you can look at in your own time. And I guess one final point on this, which I didn't mention, is that you can look at the individual quotes here too. So if you click on a subject, then you can see these quotes. So hopefully lots of value, and you could probably get lost in a lot of these dashboards, but maybe that's a good thing. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. So to get to that dashboard, if you go to our homepage, there is a link in the menu called Barometer. You do need to be logged in to see it. It's behind the member login paywall, as it were. If you have trouble accessing it, again, email us at info@ and we'll make sure you're linked to the membership. Just to reiterate, we will be showing the recording, the slides, and again, the link to the dashboard post-event, hopefully this afternoon. There will be, as John's mentioned, there will be our monthly blog article with some analysis of the recent figures coming out shortly as well. And I think hopefully we will see you in the September webinar. I think it's great. We clearly could have gone for a bit longer. Maybe we need to make these a little bit longer if the demand is there. Thank you again, everybody who is participating in the survey already. Look forward to seeing you more responses come through. Any questions, just reach out to us. Thank you to John. Thank you to Steve. And thank you to all of you. Have a lovely rest of the day. Thanks very much, folks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Here we go.